I mean, his friends probably just called him Lenny.
I happen to know for a fact that he was called Maestro in social situations. I once saw him in a bar and somebody came up to him and said, "Hello, Maestro, how about a beer?" Okay, so that's a fact.
Hey everyone, and welcome back, finally, to a new episode of Exploring Kodawari. Life got busy the past few months, but we are definitely keeping this podcast alive, and we'll be putting out new episodes as often as we can. For those who are new to the podcast, we aim to explore the deep questions about life and meaning through interviews, deep dives into various topics, usually those that intersect with the Kodawari energy. If you've never heard of this Japanese word, you can find links in the episode notes that describe what the Kodawari philosophy is and how it structures our podcast and blog. Anyways, for this episode, we were joined by conductor Chad Goodman to explore the art of orchestral conducting, a topic that definitely captures the Kodawari energy. Chad is a good friend, our neighbor, literally, and is currently the conducting fellow at the new World Symphony here in Miami. That's where my wife and co-host Yanka currently plays as well. Since 2018, Chad has been an assistant conductor to the San Francisco Symphony, has been here at New World, and has a ton of other stuff you can read on his website, linked in the show notes. Oh, and before conducting, he was also a trumpet player like me. Don't worry, we did not geek out about trumpet at all. We instead tried to dig under the surface of how orchestral conducting works in a way that I think is hopefully interesting for musicians and non-musicians alike. We talked about the meaning of music, how to interpret it, and how a conductor communicates their intentions to an orchestra. We also tried to get underneath the more abstract elements of music, like what makes certain performances so magical, or how can a conductor unify an orchestra into a kind of group flow state. And somehow I managed to get through the entire episode without quoting the maestro from Seinfeld even once. Anyways, I've always been fascinated by the art of conducting, and since Yanka and I have both played under Chad a bunch of times here at New World, we thought this would be a great way to get a more personal explanation of how conducting works. So thanks for listening, and enjoy this episode with Chad Goodman. Cool. Chad Goodman, welcome to Exploring Kodawari.
Hello.
I haven't even said the name of our podcast in so long.
I know.
We forgot to podcast for 4 months.
About 4 months, yeah.
So I usually attach an intro to the front of this, like later. But can you give a more personal intro to who you are, what you do, how you got here in this very apartment?
My name is Chad Goodman. I'm an orchestral conductor. I currently work as the conducting fellow of the New World Symphony here in Miami Beach, Florida. And this is, let's see, my third year that I've been out here.
Nice. And you came from?
Before this, I was in San Francisco, but originally a Baltimore boy. So,
yeah, East Coast.
East Coast, exactly.
We're close enough, New York and Baltimore.
Yeah.
That's how we have the same, basically, childhood humor and
yes, it's
references
true.
And all of that.
Also accent. People guess that I'm from New York fairly often.
What, really?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have the classic New York accent as much as like Brooklyn or any of that. It's. I would say I could hear the difference between New York and you. Like yeah. Baltimore has a Baltimore kind of,
Baltimore.
Wait, how do you guys know each other? Why didn't you mention that first?
2010, I want to say.
Yeah, a good year.
Good year for brass playing in San Francisco. 2010 Bay Brass Festival.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still exist?
Doesn't. The director left.
Ours was the last year. They refused to do it again. Yeah, yeah, that was... No, we weren't in the same quintet. I think we were just hanging out together.
We hung out a lot.
Okay.
And yeah, so we met as two trumpet players at a music festival in California. And then I ended up moving out to the Bay Area specifically for grad school the following year. And was out there until Miami Beach. And we reconnected here through Yanka. And it was like a blast from the past because I got to see Luke as well and just be like, oh, hey.
Yeah.
Hey, guy, I haven't seen in person in a
decade. So my goal with this is to sort of maybe crawl under the surface of conducting just a little bit and figure out like an inside take on what conducting is, but not necessarily like, you know, what everyone already knows. Just I'm curious about the inside of like how a conductor thinks about music and approaches a piece and all of that stuff. And I suppose we can start with like a basic definition. Probably like half of our audience are musicians, the other half like maybe somewhat music literate, who knows? But I think being able to explain something, like if you're an expert, being able to explain it to a beginner is like a really good sign of whether you're an expert or not. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like having enough experience with something to abstract away from it and say like, hey, you're 10 years old. I can still explain what I do. You know those Business Insider YouTube videos where it's like explaining astrophysics to a 5-year-old, to a 12-year-old, to whatever, that kind of thinking. So what would be your music muggle explanation for like what is conducting?
I'd say, and it is a multifaceted kind of occupation. So it is a challenging one to describe, but I'd say on a basic level, the role of a conductor is to unify a group of musicians to help with pacing and telling a story through the music. Because when you're working with a large group of musicians, everyone has their own ideas of how a piece should go, how their part should go. They've put in their time, hopefully, into practicing, whether it's that specific piece or just the years and years they've dedicated to the craft. So when you get a lot of people in a room with one piece, there's going to be a lot of different ideas and viewpoints on it. And I think a conductor's job is to streamline all of that and say, hey, I know I'm just one viewpoint, but for this week, let's try approaching this symphony in this specific way. And this is how the story is going to unfold this time. It could be very different next time. It might not be the way that you necessarily had dreamed of it in your head, but we have a finite period of time to bring this whole group together.
And it could be 100+ people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, that's
unity.
Yeah, unity is unification is the short answer. And then I could, of course, dive into the 10 or 12 other jobs, but it's unifying. And with that, also, I think another really important quality is I compare what I do to a sound engineer sitting at a board, a mixing board, and just fine tuning. As a conductor, you're the only one not producing sound on a stage full of people producing sound, and all of them are facing you. So you as a conductor, particularly standing on a podium, you have a higher point in which you are taking in all of the music, and you do not have the sound of your own instrument vibrating in your head, in your lips, in your whatever it might be. So the conductor has the greatest opportunity to balance and make adjustments on what the collective sound that is being created is and how it needs to be tweaked so that it hopefully justifies the intentions of the music, of the composer, of what's on the page.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times music muggles. I just love that term. It's like I get asked this question a lot by family members if I send them a link to a concert that's live streaming or whatever, or they come.
Why do you
they're
like
like,
that conductor type?
They're like, honestly, tell me, is the conductor even doing anything? You know? And they're like, would you guys just play it without them? And I'm like, yes, kind of.
Yes.
Depending on the piece, it might fall apart. Depending on the piece, it might seem totally fine to your ears. But the subtleties of unity would get affected. Mm-hmm. And then more importantly, in rehearsals, the process of digging into the layers of the music, you need a leader. Mm-hmm. Try getting 100 people to agree on anything.
Yeah. Who's going to make the decision?
You need a leader, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason that most orchestral musicians love chamber music. Maybe even the majority of them, if you could say we could pay you the same amount of money to either sit in the second violin section of the New York Philharmonic and make an incredible living, or we could pay you the same amount and you could play in a string quartet. I'd imagine most would say I'd rather play in a string quartet because you do have leadership. You have a greater say in what's happening. And of course, as a conductor, you have the perhaps largest say, except for when you're working on a concerto, in which case the role is flipped. Yeah. And the soloist has more say, depending on the fame and the level of the conductor too.
It's an interesting tension.
It's an interesting tension. that either works very well for everyone or no, and it's imbalanced and everyone kind of knows. But yeah, I think a conductor just is, the way I view it is I'm there to simplify things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that, because even without the sign language being like specifically followed in a concert, you need something to unify 100 people. And I guess my next question would be, what is the line between when an ensemble needs a conductor versus not needs one? Like, I think I was part of a project here, a chamber thing, where like you were potentially going to conduct. You're like, there's no way I'm conducting this. You guys don't need a conductor, you know?
Yeah.
I forget what it was. It was like a brass ensemble thing.
Yeah, it was. You're right. It was a brass ensemble piece. And I think
The Brahms. It was the Brahms lead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's something that I've encountered a lot. I think it depends on the complexity of the music. The number of people involved is also really important. With a smaller group, sometimes it's not essential. It is closer to like a string quartet experience, where the conductor is not needed. So when it's repertoire that maybe is simple enough or small enough forces, where maybe small enough to the point that the players are all playing off of a full score because they can, you know, then if I'm not needed, I don't want to be there. You know, I think that's a big thing.
No one wants to go to a party they're not invited to.
Exactly. And I think with conductors though, it's a challenge because there's naturally the ego is such a part of the job role. So knowing when you're not needed is I think crucial, and I think it separates a good conductor from an amazing one. And something I'm continually working on is when I am conducting a symphony, what are the moments when I'm not needed? When can I take the back seat and actually follow what's going on versus really be leading the entire orchestra?
Within a conducting experience, there are moments of you're not needed, you are needed. Yeah,
exactly. And knowing, when I'm not needed. And I think that's important. I think it's something that as conductors, especially younger conductors, it's hard to learn because you do all your preparation alone. You don't have musicians in front of you. You do it with recordings, you do it in front of an instrument, singing, whatever it might be. And then it's easy to feel the need to be in control. Yeah, in a sense, but I found the more experience I have, the more I am able to sort of pick up subtly when I'm needed and when it's not as essential. And in those situations, I can change my role because all I'm doing is jumping from one responsibility to another. So maybe in a spot where it's very, very straightforward, maybe the meters aren't complex. It's in a slow 4 beats per bar, 4/4, something like that. Maybe my role is to just simply give visual cue of when something's handing off to someone else, or it's realizing through the amount of studying I've done of the full score that, the trumpet's going to be entering and they've actually been counting rests for the last 4.5 minutes. So even though they also have an easy part, maybe the most important job for me at the moment is literally just to make eye contact with them and bring them into the folds.
And it re-engage them into the layers of music that they've been out of.
Yeah. And that is, I've thought a lot about why I love conducting, and I went from, being a trumpet player to a conductor. And
talk about an ego trip.
It's true. One stereotype, ego monster, job to another. But what I loved about conducting was that it forces you to be in the moment, to be in present time for every moment of a piece. You don't have bars rest like you do when you're playing as an instrumentalist or you're a singer in a group, in an ensemble, in an orchestra, a band, whatever it is.
You're on all
You're
the time.
on. And once again, like I just said, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily hard. It doesn't, there might be times where I'm just literally just where it is just waving my hands for some time and not necessarily offering the greatest emotional, life-changing experience every second of a piece, but I am engaged.
Vamp.
Yeah,
Vamp,
exactly.
you got,
Yeah. So I think that was probably naturally the biggest appeal for me when I started conducting was like, whoa, even if I don't love this piece, I have to be involved in every second of it. And I end up going through these cycles with music where if I'm doing a newly commissioned piece or a contemporary piece or something, or even if I don't like the piece, by the end of my study preparation and going through rehearsing and performing, I always feel like I got something out of it, and it's never as bad as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Because I've had to invest so much time into it.
Yeah.
kinda
Even things
nice.
that you don't end up loving, you appreciate or respect when you get intimate with it. You know?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Huh. I wonder, what do you think is the main thing that makes conducting not work? Sometimes I like to ask like negative questions when I'm not sure how to even ask like the right question the other way. In other words, like I'm preparing a piece. I'm like, how does this definitely not go? You know, like you're like, how does this excerpt sound obviously wrong? And then it starts pointing you in the direction of like, what is the right thing to do?
Or
If
like
you're
as an orchestral player, sometimes you have this gut feeling where like something's just not working and you can't really put your finger on it because I don't know. I'm not familiar with like the
Yeah.
technique or anything. Like I don't know.
And often when in the orchestra, you don't know what the heck is going on when something's not working.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know if it's the guy on the podium. I don't know if it's us. Is it that damn oboe player again? Like you don't know what could be going on. But from your perspective, what makes the relationship of conductor to orchestra like not work?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that can happen. I think one of the most dramatic experiences I had was working with an orchestra that had leaders in the orchestra, the concertmaster, and therefore everyone else sort of followed it once again in these natural hierarchies that we have in the orchestral world, who studied and had entire careers in Germany, in opera houses and opera orchestras of Germany, which are notorious for playing very behind the beat. And for those listening who maybe don't understand what that means, it's such an abstract concept, where I might give a downbeat and I'll snap right now into the mic, where let's say one is going to be there. In America, maybe there's more of a tendency, the orchestra will come in on that. If I give a cue and one, the orchestra comes in relatively close. Of course, it's going to be a little bit late.
Unless you're the
after my
BSO.
gesture. Exactly. But the BSO is like this orchestra I was working with, where it was like this. I'd go and one, bah, in the orchestra. That's a little exaggerated, but it's about a 1 second delay. And that's a very startling experience when I had never had this before. It was definitely this is not working. And it was because the one person, didn't play. They all played together.
Yeah.
But I'd be waving my hands and I'd always feel like I'm off by at least a beat. And they're all completely cohesive.
Yeah.
So in that situation, I had to assess, okay, what can be done here? Either I can cut off in this rehearsal and say, hey, can everyone please play a little bit more on the beat? Or in this case, I'm a young conductor. I don't know this orchestra. They have their way of playing. It's far easier for me being one person to change how I'm approaching this rather than asking 85 people to change for me. I'm not in a power position where I felt comfortable doing that. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to feel really uncomfortable moving through this. And just as long as it works, it works.
Right.
But that was an experience that things definitely weren't working for me. It was working for the orchestra though. But so much of conducting is psychology, and how do I get the best, and how do I inspire these musicians, these people who are doing a job? Once again, the reality is no matter how much we love what we do, I think after a certain point in any field, it can turn into feeling like work. And there are people who are less motivated than others. And when you have groups that don't want to be there, maybe they don't like the piece, the composer,
Didn't have their coffee that morning.
didn't have their coffee that morning. They got a flat tire on the way. They're, kids failing out of school. Once again, people bring baggage to work, no matter where you are, even if it's in an orchestra where people aren't necessarily talking. You can still feel it. And when there's a disconnect on a human and emotional level, it can be really difficult. I know this is a rambling, but there's so many examples. Another one that's worth bringing up was concerts I've done where I've had to do, let's say, a kids concert, a family concert, where in the classical world, you don't get very much rehearsal time. Usually you would get one rehearsal, like a dress rehearsal in the morning of a show, and then you do a couple shows.
Even though you're still playing like hard rep.
It's still hard music, but it usually happens during a week. Like in the instance I'm thinking, we had a concert the night before that was entirely different music, a big subscription, the big, heavy, real deal concerts. And the next morning I had to run a rehearsal on a kids concert program. And guess what? People show up tired. They're burned out from playing the night before on completely different music. They haven't practiced this kids concert music because they don't take it as seriously, which is unfortunate. But, also people can't give 110% every day for everything. And I have less rehearsal time. And when the people show up unprepared, I know it immediately because no matter what, even for that kids concert, I've put in 40, 50, 60, 100 hours into this
being
rep.
Prepared is not an option.
Yes.
Yeah, as a conductor, you can't. Orchestra musicians will say that they know the quality of a conductor really the joke, but also not joke, is like by the time we just see them walk to the podium, we already have an idea of who this person is, what the level of preparation. So I have to put in 100% because I can't fake it.
Yeah. When 100 people are experienced musicians sniffing you out.
Yes, exactly.
they see whatever you're hiding right away because so much human communication is like these subtle posture things, like the vibe you give off and Yeah.
So when I show up to a situation like this where everyone's burned out, tired, people are sight reading and phoning it in, the way I describe it is these types of rehearsals feel like for me having to drag the orchestra through the mud is what I say, because they're making mistakes that they wouldn't make on a normal basis at a professional level. They're slowing down, which in a professional setting is not always something. That's usually something. Internal pulse is something that there's a reason that these players are in these orchestras because that is something they have under wraps. But when a group is out of it, I get very physically tired. My arm starts to hurt. That's how I know that it's a hard week, that there's a disconnect. So I think this is the crux of it. When I feel physically exhausted from a rehearsal, I know that you're
pulling too much.
Things are not working. I'm having to overcompensate. I'm maybe moving with larger gestures in the hope subconsciously that maybe is going to, get everyone inspired or moving in or, honed in. But that's when I know it's not working is when I feel tired, when I go, wow, my arm hurts,
Yeah.
So
you can feel that with teaching too, when students are just not trying to get better.
Yeah, you're trying to get more animated and all that.
Yeah.
You just,
I used to call that chasing ghosts. When you're like, all right, let's really figure out why this kid's, playing is not working. Like I've been doing stop chasing ghosts. It's not working because they don't care right now,
Yeah.
When someone doesn't care, you can't make it better,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a good point. I've always felt for conductors when I'm in an orchestra and I can feel that's the energy because I'm like, guys, come on.
Yeah, and it's kind of contagious, unfortunately. Like you want to kind of make a difference by yourself, but when people are not on board, I just feel so bad. Like that must be such a bad experience too.
It's hard, but once again, it's all about reframing and what are my expectations for this week, for this project, for this day. And I think that's a really important thing. If your ego is so big that it's every concert needs to change the world and I need to inspire every human on that stage, everyone, that's going to be an issue. You're not going to hit that every time.
Yeah.
I think we're all...
Nor should you, right?
Nor should you. And so reframing, it's no different than working with a student who comes in for a private lesson, and says, I haven't practiced since our lesson last week. Well, you can either be angry, disappointed with the student, send them home, or you go, you know what, I'm glad I know this now. Let's reframe what's our goal for the day. It's not going to be that you do a run through of the concerto we've been working on for weeks. It might be, okay, let's get the fundamentals in again. Let's get your chops back in a bit better shape.
I always appreciate when students let me know ahead of time.
Yeah.
With stuff like that.
Yeah. So with conducting, you don't know ahead of time usually.
And you can't say something the same way. Like 100 people can't go up to the conductor and say, hey, we just finished, a Bruckner symphony last night, so we're kind of tired. Like, I'm sure this is you just have to intuit it,
Yeah. Or you do hear these things. Usually it's from the administrative side. As a conductor, it's weird because you bridge the gap between artistic administration and the performers. And so I find I have very close relationships with the administrative staff. And so they're the ones the personnel manager might come in right before the first rehearsal and say, all right, Chad, we're excited to have you here. Just want to give you a heads up. We're missing these 3 people. This person's out sick. And just so you know, like they had a double concert yes, run out concert last night. We actually didn't. They probably didn't get back to their homes until like 11 at night. Just so you know.
Yeah. Data point.
Exactly. Data point, because it's not necessarily going to come up. You're like you said, you have to intuit it, or someone has been kind enough to give you a tip off or a lead.
Right. So I have a Kodawari question. So Kodawari is sort of like what we developed this podcast blog about. Have you heard the term before?
I have not.
So it's a Japanese concept word, and I first heard it in the world of coffee. About, and it kind of works for crafts in general, like pursuing the ideal, pursuing perfection, but also with the knowledge that you never can achieve your ideal. You can't achieve perfection, and yet it's the pursuit itself that is meaningful. Kind of a very Sisyphus-esque kind of idea. And when I heard about that in coffee, like it got me into like buying all this coffee equipment and chasing after like the perfect extraction. There's a book called like God in a Cup about like getting the perfect coffee. And then it syncs up with what we do in music, like just always refining, chasing after almost like a carrot on a stick. You can't get the carrot, but I love carrots. So let me get after that carrot. And then I was thinking like for conducting, it's like that process, but it's not even boxed into like an instrument and a part. It's like there's the score, there's the notes, there's the music, there's the layers of music and all the details in the score. But then music is filled with all these contexts of like history and what the composer was living at that time. And then like there's just rabbit holes upon rabbit holes you could go down to try to refine, Yeah. So I was curious what that Kodawari element, if that's something you've kind of just naturally arrived at, and then how do you let go of that? Like, I still need to refine this because I can't anymore. The rehearsal's today. It's time to just do it,
Yeah, I think there's a beauty to being a conductor that aligns with this immediately that I did not have as a trumpet player, which is what I stated earlier. The obvious, I'm not the one making sound. I'm not producing sound. So there's a great freedom in knowing this, that I can't have complete control over what's going on. And there's great, it's a comfort. I found that my obsession with attaining the highest levels as a conductor are far healthier than they ever were for me as a trumpet player, because with a trumpet, you're worried you can crack a note. Oh, that note's flat, that note's sharp, that's this or that. We can obsess over these little details of perfection, imperfection. As a conductor, though, I realized after the first couple concerts I did that when I'd hear someone make a mistake, let's say specifically, maybe it's the trumpet player cracks a note, that would be as close to home for me, because that was my main instrument, as anything could be. I wouldn't even flinch. It doesn't matter. Do I hear it? Of course I do. I'm aware of it, but it doesn't change for me the greater, bigger picture. And so this idea of perfection is not a note perfection thing. It's not something I care about. If there's too much that's wrong and things are out of sync, that is an issue. And those are things I want to correct. But what I'm chasing as a conductor is not note perfection. Is probably not the same perfection that the instrumentalists are chasing. It's probably good that they're chasing a different form of perfection, if that's what we want to call it. For me, I'm chasing a feeling of connectivity, that I'm able to sort of feel like we're all connected. It's that weird, vague, is there science to this? Is it some spiritual thing? I don't know. But the idea of from start to finish, whether there's wrong notes, things that are slightly out of tune, whatever, that all of us collectively are just like honed in, unified. We're
on the same like consciousness wavelength.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that this is happening with the audience, if we have an audience as well. That's what I'm after. And I think all of us have had experiences of performances or rehearsals. Even sometimes it happens in the rehearsal and the concert's nowhere near as good. That does happen. So that's what I pursue. So I don't even think of it as perfection in maybe the traditional sense of classical music or just performers, because like I said, I don't have any control over in the moment in a concert over any of that.
A weird, like paradoxical freedom of like, Yeah.
It must be freeing at the same time. Like it kind of makes you like step away from the obsession. Like that must be a healthy feeling.
Yeah, I think it's really healthy. For me personally, and I think, I know plenty of conductors who are more nervous and deal with more performance anxiety as conductors than it is instrumentalists. For me, it's actually the opposite. I do I have nerves? Of course we all do, but I don't have it to the same extent. And I think this is part of it. There's a great freedom in it. And what are my expectations of this performance, of my role in this performance? I want to be there as a connector. And that's my job for the evening. And we get as close to that feeling of oneness as possible. That's what I'm focused on.
And communicating what the composer intends, what the music needs to serve. So yeah.
It seems to be a common answer, even for instrumentalists, of just removing yourself from the equation is often the best way to get over your nerves and any of the negative aspects of being a musician. It's like just whether you're thinking I'm serving the audience, I'm serving the music, I'm serving the intention of the composer, whatever the way you can get out of the ego, whatever, you're not like, oh, like, what if I crack this note? You're just like, I'm, showing how cool this music is, whatever phrase you can think.
Yeah. And I think when a performance becomes effective and when musicians are playing at the highest level, they perform in a way where it's aware they know they're part of this continuum where their entrance has a connection to what came before and to what comes next. It's a conductor, that's all I'm thinking of. It once again,
you're like sanding the different layers together, like smoothing them, like assuming the music wants to be smooth.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of thinking about it. And I think the great performers, they know their role at any given time. And their role is not necessarily about themselves. Like you're saying, it's not an ego thing. Yeah. It's I'm a cog in a far greater, beautiful machinery.
Yeah. I think we're wired as humans to want that, to be part of something bigger, whether that's a group of cavemen hunting, like why do we love sports? Sports are simulated war, It's like war that you don't have to worry about people dying, but we're doing the same basic, tribal behavior, but in a more fun and controlled way. Yeah. I had a section here about like music and meaning, because the word meaning has been on my mind. I recently finished a long article on the Exploring Kodawari website about overcoming nihilism and exploring ways to define meaning and find meaning. And in that context, it was more like meaning in life and stuff. But I'd be curious, whatever answer comes to your mind, like in the context of music, what is meaning and where do you think that meaning comes from?
As a performer, or this is just as a broad, all-encompassing, like what is meaning in music?
Yeah, like in the context of music. In other words, like meaning in life could be a whatever. But why is music meaningful? Why do people? I mean, people love music. People come to hear music. My mom just went to a Paul McCartney concert last night. Some people hate classical music, but they love other music. Some people hate jazz. People have different tastes and all that, but so like not necessarily classical music, but just organized sound, Yeah. Where does the meaning come from, and or what is it? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm inspired. Yeah, I'm inspired to give a very abstract answer because I think that's the best I can do. But I'd guess that people find meaning in music because they see themselves in this music. Maybe they relate to it, or maybe it's what they aspire to be, or maybe it reminds them of someone else or some other event. And so once again, it's all about connectivity and connection, and it's an outlet, or it's a way of finding ways to relate to yourself and the human experience.
Yeah.
Whether that's through Paul McCartney singing a song with lyrics are the greatest help in this, or orchestral music, whether
Right.
it's a tone poem where there's a specific story, and maybe you hear Alpine Symphony, you go, wow, I can imagine myself being on a hike, I'm caught in a
Right.
crazy storm at the top, or I'm at the summit now and I'm looking out and I feel like I'm on top of the world. Or a symphony that is, there's no storyline to it as
Right.
far as we know, but you feel pain and you feel love and you feel fear and all of these very human things. And
Right. Having just had Mahler 5 happen here, I'm thinking like in contrast to something with lyrics or a story, like program music, something like a Mahler symphony, like the 5th, it's just like there's like a deep message there. And if I could just put it in words, it wouldn't be Mahler 5,
Yeah, people have their own meaning out of it, basically.
like the meaning is so untouchable. It's like so generalized knowledge. It's such generalized knowledge that you can't just say like, oh, the message is always do this or whatever. It's like it's primal. It's more deeper or something.
yeah, and this reminds me, I'm going to butcher a paraphrase to the point that might not even need to be said that it's a paraphrase. I could be sort of making part of it up. But I heard a concert recently in San Francisco, and there was a quote that was spoken from an artist who was saying something along the lines of, if we all got along, if we all knew how to communicate with each other, we wouldn't need art.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the Camus quote? It's, if the world were clear, art would not exist.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So there you go. This person was paraphrasing.
Yeah.
That's
So art kind of comes in at the boundaries of what we can't understand about who we are and what we're doing, and pokes in its vague ways at answering that. And I think the key with music is, it's like, I heard it described once as like, music represents patterns of being. Like if you're listening to Bach, you hear like, let's say a fugue or something. You hear an idea, and you hear another idea, and you hear another idea. And then you hear the interaction of that evolve. And those are patterns of being, And that's what we do as humans. We have, I'm a person, you're a person. It's like, how do we be ourselves yet also harmonize and get along? There's a very just mirror of what we're doing. And with Mahler 5, I kept thinking every time, there's just this, almost like the way a plant grows up, there's like this reaching up towards something in Mahler's music that you're often in the sad stuff, but there's like a meaning to just like pursuing and working through the shit, to get out of the soil and then up to the sunlight kind of thing. And you can't really say, I kind of asked you a trick question in the sense that like, I don't think you can say what the meaning of music is, because if you could, like you said, it wouldn't be like Mahler even said, right? Isn't there a Mahler quote? Like, if I could say what I had to express in words, I wouldn't bother writing music, something like that.
Yeah.
Or I could be making that up.
Yeah. No, I've heard. Yeah.
It sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah. On this topic, like of meaning in music, I had a question about conducting. Like, in my head, I have this model of like, let's say, you have like a word, you're reading an article and there's like a word and it's hyperlinked to another article. So you're in this one article and you could click that link to further read about one concept talked about in that article. And then in that article, it talks about a book to dive deeper. And in that book, you could click deeper into, whatever, that kind of rabbit hole. What's like what's an example of like a rabbit hole like that you've gone down while studying a piece of music and it really unlocked like a new meaning in the music or changed your interpretation? Maybe it's like translating something you didn't, something like that.
Yeah. I'll give you an instance from last week. I was the assistant conductor with San Francisco Symphony, and there was a program that included Haydn's 103rd Symphony, which was nicknamed by publishers. It was not Haydn's choice, but it was nicknamed the Drum Roll Symphony. And the reason being is the very first bar of the first movement It's a fermata and an indication for the drummer to, there's just one note written there with a roll symbol over it, essentially. And so that's where the nickname came from. And the conductor I was assisting, Bernard Labadie, who's a period specialist, meaning he focuses on historical intention, historically informed performance, which on this podcast, I'm sure you've heard lots of talk of at this point, through Luke's deep passion for this side of the classical music space. But he was saying for years and years and years and years, this bar and the subsequent bar, when this returns 2/3 of the way through the first movement, there's another fermata bar with a drum roll. That's how it's been done. And it's nicknamed the Drum Roll Symphony. So you go, okay, it just starts good. Then we go into the orchestra enters. The maestro, Bernard, he brought up that music historians and scholars then were looking at the original manuscripts and saw that entrada is written underneath of this in small letters, and that, right, entrada is introduction. This is an introduction, and that this is not just one drum rolled note. This was in fact an indication for the percussionist to the timpanist to improvise. And so this needs to be a drum solo, as long or as short as whatever they intend it to be. And same thing when it comes in later. So for years and years and years, it was just implied that it's one note because that's what's written on the page. But the translation of the word that was found in one of the particular manuscripts
is what unlocked that.
Is what unlocked it. So that type of stuff happens, not maybe in that context historically for me all the time, but when I study a piece of music, I study every aspect. I study, like you alluded to, the history of the piece. I always, in scores that I'm conducting, I write down on the first page of the score, next to the title, the pieces of music that were written that same year by that composer, or the year before, the year after, whatever the previous and following works were. So I have an idea contextually within their canon. Also other important works by other composers that happen, other events that happen, wars, tragedies, whatever it might be that were happening near them or
everything
anywhere.
is relevant.
Everything's relevant. And then on top of that, you have, like right now I'm studying Beethoven 7, which I'm going to conduct next May in Chicago, or outside of Chicago in Elgin with the Elgin Symphony. And so I'm prepping now for a concert. Concerts I have May 6th and 7th, 2023. And I have open tabs on my computer right now of 4 different dissertations that various people have written over the last couple decades on this piece, and a formal analysis of it. How is this broken down? Is it sonata form? What's the first theme? What's the second theme? How do they return? How do they mutate? What's going on with the harmony? And I have 4 different people who all have different ideas. There's plenty that overlap, but there's different ideas in all of them. Plus I have a score you can get through the New York Phil archives. You can see their scanned scores and parts from everything that they own. And so I always love looking at Leonard Bernstein's scores to pieces of standard repertoire I'm conducting, because often he would mark furiously in his scores, whether it's this is a 4-bar phrase, this is a 3-bar phrase, or dynamics, or bowings, or he'd make little notes for himself, or what the emotion of the character should be. And oftentimes I'll disagree, and that can be a really interesting and revealing thing. And so there are times where I go, oh my God, I never thought of that. I thought of that as one 8-bar phrase, but he really specified it. I mean, he wrote it in colored pencil that this is a 5-bar phrase and a 3-bar phrase. And that can change how you get the musicians to shape, what's the direction this is heading. And then there are instances where I go, I think Leonard Bernstein was completely wrong, and I feel very confident. Now, this might change in years or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Might change by the end of the day when I figure out why he did that because I see another spot or, whatever. Yeah.
And so I have moments like that where I go, whoa, I completely disagree with this legendary master of a musical mind. And that changes.
Should have been drunk when he wrote that.
Highly possible.
Yeah, and then you can see they all have multiple copies of his scores, and you can see some of them that were an earlier edition. That was when he just started working with the New York Phil, and then one that was marked in the 70s, when he was an older man, and you can see how things changed, and that's
such a
really
cool thing to have markings like
that. It's crazy. And so that's been a huge resource my entire conducting career. Whenever they started the New York Phil archive, putting that online for free, oh my God.
Yeah, I remember looking through that one time when I was playing a Mahler symphony. I was like, I'm just curious. And then I was like, all right, I'm not the conductor. I need to practice the part. I don't have time for this.
I mean, they have, speaking of Mahler, right? They have some of his scores because he was the music director of the New York Philharmonic. So you can see Mahler's handwritten notes on repertoire he was conducting. And Bernstein, nerding out on a very deep conductor level, notated scores. He marked his scores in red and blue pencil, with red being cues, blue being dynamics. I think that's the order he used, because he saw it in the archives there in person when he started working in the New York Phil that Mahler had done. So
interesting. They had colored pencils back then?
yeah, exactly.
I'm just thinking, like, how did you get like blue pencils back then?
He was marking in red and blue. And so Bernstein went, hey, I like that. I'm going to start doing that. And guess what? I do that. So MTT does that. I do that. So once again, it's lineage.
I heard him say that at the close of the Mahler 5 concert, MTT. He was like, he made a joke about like red and blue.
He did, a very obscure joke that.
Yeah, I was like, I don't think anybody here got that.
Okay, now it makes
Yeah.
sense.
So
Like,
Bernstein always marked with red and blue. In fact, he uses a specific Swiss brand, is what he had used of pencils that are sharpened on both sides. So half the pencil is lead, and the other half is blue. And Bernstein would refer to these as his ready blueies, I think is what he called them, which is hilarious. But yeah, I mean, and that's something that can be passed down, and it's part of lineage, I think, which is the beauty of this art form, and something I don't take for granted and I'm proud of is my musical lineage of my mentors and how I'm connected once again to this continuum, this ever growing both forwards and backwards as we learn more and more.
Always evolving, but holding on theoretically to the deepest things that are really working about it, ideally.
Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned how much work goes into exploring in music. You said like you have 3 different dissertations are open, because I don't know, some of our listeners might not know like how much work goes into,
or
like,
that
just
more
preparing.
than a year before a concert you start preparing,
and you prepare not just to like how you're going to wave your hands, like quote unquote, but you prepare in so many different aspects. I think it's important that
and I think the other fascinating thing about conducting is I put in this level of work. Now I'm at a point in my career where I am busy, I'm very busy, but not to the level of some of the top conductors who are on the road. They're guest conducting everywhere. They're conducting consistently, like almost every week somewhere, where there often comes a time in a conductor's career and life where they don't have the luxury of time the same amount. So like, I'm young, I'm hungry. This is, I'm in the earlier stages of my career. You're considered a young conductor in your 40s. It's a very interesting profession. So,
which says a lot about how it works too, that you can see young violinists age 22 playing as soloists, but it's going to be rare that you see a 21-year-old conductor, deeply interpreting a symphony.
Yeah. And I think this ties to what I've seen through what I've learned a lot in Japanese culture, actually, I mean, if you take something that many listeners have probably, seen at some point, saw Jiro Dreams of Sushi, something like that.
Yeah.
This idea where Jiro doesn't let his son make the egg, prepare the eggs until it's been 40 years or something like that. And it's this idea of experience.
Yeah.
But that was a slight tangent. But just to say what Janka's, bringing up about how much goes into preparation, all of that work helps me formulate an idea and a concept. I don't share the majority of that ever with an orchestra. I can't go in and lecture an orchestra and go, oh, you're based on this, and so this we're going to do this way because X, Y, Z, because I studied this or this dissertation, or isn't it really interesting that in this bar we go from this chord, a 5 chord here, and then it veers off in this other way, and there's modal mix. Like, an orchestra does not want a conductor to lecture them.
Yeah.
And so the majority of work I put in never gets shared. I have notes. I like to mark my scores very heavily. I put what characters and emotions every phrase has. I don't share those. Maybe once in a while I am in a rehearsal, I'll cut off and go, yeah, you know what?
An anecdote about this moment or something.
Yeah, one anecdote. Or I say, oh yeah, oboe, you know what? Can that be a little bit more mournful? But I'll have 3 adjectives written on my score for that oboe solo. I'm not going to share 3 of them.
Yeah.
But I do that for my level of preparation, which I learned from my mentor, from Michael Tilson Thomas, because that's how he does everything. Yeah. He thinks deeper, on a deeper level than actually just about any musician
But
I've
it
ever
still
met.
affects what you do. Do you know that Ralph Waldo Emerson quote? It goes something like, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't remember the books I've read like I don't remember the meals I've eaten. Even so, they have made me.
I haven't heard that.
And I think that's a beautiful way to say, like, the work you put in,
Makes the music, but like
you could have
not-
20 tabs open, you know? That's going to affect how you walk out on stage, how you stand on the podium, how you give that downbeat. It's a depth of something. Just like, you know, I have this weird experience where like I'll read a book in detail that I really cared about, and then 5 years will go by. And I usually take notes on a book and leave them in my phone, and I'll think of like, oh yeah, that book. And then I'm like, wait, I barely remember this book. And then I think of that quote, like, even so, it's in me. Like, it's just not at that level of like right here, right now, accessible, but it's part of my DNA now, you know?
Yeah, and I something as a younger conductor, I'm now at a point though with experience, a number of years I've done this, where I am starting to get repeat opportunities to revisit a piece, and it's with a different orchestra, but like I'm in a different space. It's no different than reading the book that you loved when you were 18 and you reread it at 28 and then later, and it changes, and maybe it's you find different things in the piece, or maybe you realize you don't know why you can't figure out why you loved the piece as much as you did, because you don't have that same connection with it. But what I love is that it's not static. What I do is never static. It's an endlessly fascinating career, because every performance is different, every rehearsal is different, and interpretations change. And I see it in mentors who are much older. Let's take, once again, bringing up Michael Tilson Thomas, who is 77 right now, and I remember spending time with him. Went to his place last spring. He was preparing to conduct Beethoven 5 with the London Symphony, and he was going the next week, and he wanted to talk through it with me, which once again is like a dream, to be like this living legend. Like calls me up and says, Chad, I have some ideas about this Beethoven Symphony I want to run by you. Can you come over? It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be right there.
And so we do. And once again, this is as standard a piece. I'd assume he's in over 50 years of conducting professionally. I'd assume he's done hundreds of performances of this piece. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he's done 500 plus performances of this piece. We sat there and talked through the piece for 3 hours, and he's just questioning it. What do you think about this? Or how could this be more spontaneous? Do you have any ideas, Chad, for this? I'm thinking about holding this fermata longer here, and I could make it more efficient in the rehearsals by telling the orchestra, okay, real quick, get your pencils. This fermata we're going to hold, closer to 1 to 2 seconds, but this one will be 5 to 6 seconds. And he's 50 plus years into conducting.
The depth of him, but also the depth of the music.
Exactly.
That you can spend that much time with it and still have a sense of mystery and beginner's mind towards it.
Yes. And that's my goal with conducting, is I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. Once again, things change. Maybe there will be a time when I want balance in some other fashion, but I admire that so much. And that's what I crave, is to be that hungry about music and have that be a driving force in my life as long as it can. And with conducting, because you're not worrying about like fine muscle memory, things that maybe fade quicker, your lips as a trumpet player. You can conduct later and later and later. And like Herbert Blomstedt, famous conductor, he's 95 now. He's still conducting. He's flying over the world. He's been famous since the 60s, 50s and 60s as a professional conductor. He doesn't need to do this to make money. He's made more money than anyone could ever need as to live comfortably. He had all the fame. He's had decades of fame. He doesn't need that. He's doing it because he needs to keep...
He has something to say.
He has something to say, and he's curious, right? That Pablo Casals quote about, when they asked him, like, why are you still, practicing? You're in your 70s or 80s, whatever it was, and he's like, because I think I'm getting better or something. Yeah, I'm making progress. That's
beautiful. I'm making progress.
Yeah, I think I'm making progress. Like, that's...
Yeah.
Oof. Okay,
I think these are all different ways of expressing that same Kodawari thing. And I could also have totally, botched the original meaning of it, but for me, I kind of made it into this like word that could codify like a life philosophy of like, you never arrive anywhere. Like, arrivals are an illusion. You're just always traveling somewhere, And for musicians, we have this sense of like, that's a beautiful quote, like, because I'm progressing. Like, of course, that's why I wake up and do anything, because I might get better.
Yeah, this idea of arrivals is really interesting. And I think anyone goes through this in their lives. Everyone goes through it. But I think there are certain things in any industry, in our industry, and let's say in this country as a classical musician, there are certain bucket list experiences. I'd like to be able to, I want to perform at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
I want to be a headliner at Carnegie Hall. I want to conduct the New York Philharmonic, whatever it might be. There's
The proms or whatever.
exactly the BBC proms at Royal Albert Hall, whatever these might be. And guess what? If you're lucky enough, you get to experience those things. And then from talking with anyone who's done any of this, it's always, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
You know,
It
what's
ends.
the next project? What's the next? Yeah. And it's great. You've done that. You've won the Grammy. You've won 10 Grammys. You've won 20 Grammys. Like that's just an award, an acknowledgement of the hard work you've been putting in your entire life. So that doesn't necessarily have the same meaning.
Yeah.
And so,
If you're chasing after the arrival, the attainment,
yeah.
you're going to be disappointed when you get it. And then, I mean, let's say like you're chasing after the Grammy or whatever the thing you have, and then you get it. It's going to take probably 12 hours for your brain to go, what's next? You know?
Yeah. And you hope that it does. And you hope that it's for a positive, that you go, great, what's next?
Exactly.
Not,
Yeah.
oh my God, what's next? And and naturally people find both. They experience both.
Yeah.
The reason that I think people who from the vantage point of the average person would say, wow, that person has everything. They have money, they have success in what they've done, they own a house, they don't have debt, they can fill in the blank with all these things. And a lot of those people are very unhappy.
Yeah.
And it's because they don't have this. They don't have something to
To keep them going.
Yeah.
I have one more question about communication and then like a quick speed round of like,
I love that.
So the communication question was, I just rewatched this video today. When we were at Stony Brook, the conductor, Rosin Milanov, have you heard of him?
Yeah.
So he came 3 or 4 times. And I remember really just connecting with something about how he conducted and watched a couple of YouTube videos of interviews and whatnot. And he kind of said something along the lines of like, we as conductors have a sign language and we're trying to get the musicians to use their hands correctly in that sense. But then he said, we're also trying to like inspire and put heart to the music and expression. And he said that deepest communication from a conductor comes from the eyes. And I'd be curious, like, would you agree with that? How do you react to that? Because I always, since he said that, I've kind of paid attention to conductors' eyes to see how they make eye contact, when they make it, and then I remember, just to put some context in this, I was reading a book on like primate evolution and how we evolved our intelligence and whatnot. And humans are like one of the few mammals that have whites around the sclera, the part of our eye that isn't where the light goes in, which allows us to see where someone's looking. Other primates and mammals, the white part that we have is the same color as the middle part of their eye. And so I was just thinking like eye contact is fundamental to our evolution of working in groups and understanding other people's emotions, where they're looking, what their intention is, that kind of thing. You walk past someone on the street like we did today. I made eye contact with this guy. I'm like, Yanko, let's keep going. That guy's fucked.
Yeah.
You just read a deep emotion from the subtlest of eye contacts, So anyways, I was just curious what your reaction to his saying that is.
Yeah, it's so romantic. What a romanticized statement. And I love being a musician, and I mean, anyone who thinks as an artist, like that's such a beautiful thing, and there's truth to it for sure. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't limit it to the eyes.
It's your nose.
Oh my God. That's a very weird reference.
Yeah. I'll link it in the episode notes.
Oh my God. Are you? Yeah.
I won't.
Yeah,
You're going to have to figure out what I just referenced.
Yeah, write that down.
I'm so lost. Go on.
But I do think body language in general. Now the eyes, it's curious, right? Of course, I think all of us have thought of this. All performers in the last several years of this pandemic, where masks are being worn. A conductor, I always think everything, my whole entire face is a way to communicate expression in a performance, in a rehearsal, whenever. And now I'm limited. I only have eyes and eyebrows to use. I don't have everything else. I find the mouth very useful when I That's a funny statement. I find the mouth very useful, for speaking.
Sorry, I just heard that sentence in isolation.
Exactly.
I was like, I'm going to clip that out.
Yes. but for working with an orchestra, it's not only using my eyes and showing expression in that and my eyebrows, but it's also maybe articulation is something I think a lot about. And so it's showing, I might be gritting my teeth if I want something really short, or it's very open if I want it to be a warm, rounded sound. And that's been removed from the equation with masks.
Yeah.
So are eyes the most important? I don't know. I think they're all very important. I think they're all tools.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of it as the be all end all, but of course there's a lot to what you can show.
I think it's also like,
eyes.
it's not just literally the eyes, but all the muscles around the eyes and how you shape the gaze,
Yeah. So I'm going to put it on both of you. I mean, Janka, what do you feel as a performer? What do you consciously, a lot of what you do with reacting to a conductor is subconscious, or it is using peripheral vision and you're not really locking in because you have notes to look at and think about. But what do you feel as a performer is something important? Is there any aspect that you can picture being the most important with a conductor, a way of connecting?
Well, what happened is I don't know, I might be influenced because of what you just said, but this past Mahler concert that we did with MTT, I think gaze was the biggest one, but like not the like quick one, but the one where he turned his entire body and like looked right into your soul, where I'm like, he really wants something right now, and I need to figure out what that is, and I need to give that. So I think gaze plus like a body gesture, so it wasn't just the eyes.
Yeah.
I think that was the most clear to me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's like an attention thing, right? When someone's paying attention to you, you're like, oh shit, like they want something. Like, and if it's a conductor, how do I give it? Yeah. I mean,
it's not always clear what he wanted, to be very honest, but I'm like, he wants something right now, and I need to kind of figure that out myself. So yeah, if it's volume, if it's like, come with me, like I wasn't exactly sure with him. But.
And sometimes it's supposed to be a little bit unclear. There's just like an undefined depth of something that they want, If it's like a sad moment in Mahler, like, I'm thinking of Mahler 5-second movement when all of the chaos kind of dies away and the cellos are just playing that soft thing. If he looks at the cello section with like sadness in his eyes, then that helps them feel like, okay, I'm not just playing ba-dee-da. They're like, they're going to find that emotion more easily if that emotion's leaking out of the conductor's eyes, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't think the eyes are always the most important thing, but I think perhaps maybe the deepest moments might come from that. And then it's also your nose. All right. Ready for speed round?
Yes.
All right. What's the most profound thing that you've changed your mind on, whether in music, personal life, whatever, over the last 10 years? Something you used to believe and don't believe, something you never believed and do believe, whatever.
Wow, this is a speed round.
You got 10 seconds.
I'd say I've definitely. Once again, it's this the abstract, the sort of indescribable spirituality of things, or how are we connecting? Once again, through conducting this profound experience of what is going on here, that I can describe the atmosphere as being electric. Everyone in the room is zoned in, is locked in. I don't know none of us are communicating right now with mouth, with anything, yet we're all together on this. That just sort of rattled my world. So definitely an openness to the unknown
Awesome. I love that. You might be interested in, have you ever heard of Stephen Kotler?
No.
I'll send you some stuff. He has a book and he studies flow states. And his protocols, like the Navy SEALs have started using it to make like SEAL Team 6 or, groups of like 10 Navy SEALs. How do they work as like one cohesive unit in these like subtle, like you don't even have to communicate like when this person's going to move and signal this, like, and there's cool ways. He basically studies why do humans sometimes spontaneously go into these flow states? And people have different triggers for it. And you can take a flow test where you figure out like what your flow profile is and what precondition your flow file, what preconditions tend to put you in a flow state versus get you out of it and stuff like that.
Can't wait. Yeah.
I'll find that link and send it to you and put it in the notes. Second one, what is the annual rainfall in Bora Bora? Best guess.
This is a reference to a TV show. Please, you don't need to answer.
A decent amount.
That's the right answer.
Sounds like you should have studied Mora Mora.
Oh God, I can't believe we actually.
I might have to cut that out. It's 76 inches, though, if anybody's like going to go to a bar trivia or something. 76 inches, the annual average rainfall in Bora Bora.
I honestly didn't think you actually wrote this, but moving on. Okay, so without getting in trouble, naming names or anything, what is the craziest thing you've ever witnessed while conducting?
Oh man. I don't even know. On the spot, this is challenging because once again you shut out a lot of what's happening too.
Yeah.
Because you are in a flow state, hopefully.
Well, I think it could also mean like you're in a rehearsal and somebody stood up and said like, "Fuck this, I'm done with
Oh,
orchestra
yeah.
life." You know, like what?
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I've seen plenty of that. Not from me conducting. But
Yeah.
in my trumpet days. Small things I catch as a conductor, because once again, you do have the vantage point of making eye contact with every single other person on stage, which no other person on stage has that opportunity.
Or
I'm the only one
or
facing.
people will just get weirded out if you
Exactly.
are. Yeah.
So it's catching people rolling their eyes after I've said something.
Yeah.
And I know immediately, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
noted. And,
Put that in my book of names.
yeah. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer. I'm sure 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 2
Something
days from
comes
now,
to your
I'll
mind.
have more to share.
Well, we're about
Yeah.
to have dinner, so just tell us that.
Exactly. Yeah.
What's something you are sure is true? And if you are not 100% sure about anything being true, what's like, one of the strongest beliefs that you're like, this has got to be true? I should tell you now. Yeah, that would be a great. Our speed round is like, ironically, like,
Yeah.
not
Deep.
speed oriented.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Say it one more time. What is something?
What's something you're sure is true, or as close to being sure as you could think of?
Oh God, I don't know. This is really hard. That's oddly difficult. That I am meant to express some part of my being through making music. I can't separate from that.
Cool. I like that. I think that's a good thing for whatever artist you're. I still have in my wallet what's it called? Fortune cookie that I got in high school. This was like a year after I started getting serious about music, and it said, "Music will play a crucial role in your life."
Are you serious?
Yeah.
No idea.
Yeah, I don't think I ever told you that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's somewhere in my wallet. And then another quick, easy speed round question to end us off. What is the meaning of life?
Is that
Very
the
easy.
actual?
Yeah.
Oh, no pressure, just easy.
Well, I'm not going to say 42 because I bet most people have said that.
Honestly, I don't
But-
think anyone has said
ever
42
said
yet.
that. Yeah,
I mean, I have, but
I don't think anyone has.
yeah.
Or I
Yeah.
would have remembered probably.
What is the meaning of life? Oh God, on the spot. Let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, for me, what it comes down to, things I care about, creating deep, meaningful connections with other people, whether that's through music, whether that's through conversation, romance, whatever it might be, eating amazing food, traveling to gain a broader perspective of just how different life is for other people all over the world, and being appreciative of what you have.
Yeah. Gratitude.
Gratitude. Yeah.
I think it's okay. Like I used to flinch at like, oh, you can't say what's the meaning of life is making meaningful connections or, I think you can. Fuck that.
Yeah, or
say
once again,
anything.
yeah, you can say, or you can give the answer and say, there is no meaning to life. The meaning of life is what you feel like putting out there and receiving,
Yeah.
right?
Or you can be Mr. Peanut Butter and say meaning of life is searching for the meaning of life until you die or something.
No, he says, the universe is a cruel and uncaring void. The secret to life isn't the search for meaning. It's to keep yourself busy with unimportant nonsense. And eventually you'll be dead. This is a dog in the cartoon BoJack Horseman.
God.
No, but I like that answer. Connection,
Connection.
gratitude, like words like this. Like if you can't just assume those kinds of meaningful things, then good luck doing the alternative. Go ahead and live a life without connection, without gratitude, without seeking out meaning. Like see what happens. It's probably not going to be great.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was a solid hour of some deep stuff. Thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thank you.
You can just tell me after this, like what links I'll link to your website and whatever else you want me to link to. Do you have like social? You have Instagram, I know.
I do.
Do you have
yeah.
like a YouTube channel or?
Yes, I do. I don't use it as much, but yeah, some social media links,
Cool.
my
So
website.
check
yeah.
out the episode notes. We'll put all that in there. And let's go make some Turkish food for dinner.
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks. Bye. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Exploring Kodawari. If you enjoyed it, we hope you'll consider sharing it on social media and with friends. You can also help us out by leaving a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those help us more than you would think. And if you'd like to help us out in a more substantial way, consider going over to our website to make a donation through PayPal. Links are in the episode notes for this. You can do this as a one-time donation or a recurring monthly donation. All of that support will help us to set aside time in order to create content for the podcast and the blog. And finally, please get in touch with us and say hi, either on social media or privately through email. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.